What's going on, guys? TG or ThunderGod here today, talking about Itachi, big meat slinging Uchiha. You think that's his meat? It gets mistaken with the crow. He's just got it. But anyway, today's video pretty self-explanatory, but a very interesting video since there's a lot of very interesting matchups. Essentially going to be throwing each of the Hokage in Sasuke's position against Itachi and Uchiha hideout and seeing what they could really do against an Itachi who has intent to kill. So enough about the prattle. Let's actually get into this discussion. Now, starting off, I do want to kind of talk about Itachi for a second. Now, I'm going to do my best to kind of introduce some new ideas here because I think a lot of people know a lot about Itachi and, you know, I've heard a lot of the same arguments. So, for example, a lot of people have seen the statement where he stated to be equal to EMS Sasuke. Some people also have that interpretation off of Itachi's performance in relativity to Sasuke in that encounter. That's all fine. They're very comparable in that encounter, and anything before that, you know, version of Sasuke is just objectively weaker than Itachi. Itachi's also just above the Sannin tier of fighter. Whether you look at any of his interactions with the Orochimaru, now I'm going to save the Hydra form for a minute, but just his base Sharingan pretty much negging Orochimaru and forcing him to leave the Akatsuki, or Orochimaru just admitting that Itachi was just always beyond him in strength, while Orochimaru did think he had a chance with Edo Tensei against the likes of Hiruzen, you know. And I don't need to go into like the Sannin and Hiruzen's lore and relativity to the 5 Kage because a lot of people have heard these arguments before, so I won't waste anybody's time with discussing them. And aside from a lot of Itachi's arsenal, you know, his nature releases, water, wind, and fire, along with having access to yin and yang release, the main thing I actually want to cover is the difference between Itachi and Edo Itachi. Now, because a lot of people, in my opinion, just jump on this train of just equating Edo Itachi to a live Itachi and what they can do. And I can see a case for that, maybe at the start of the fight, but it just doesn't work. Now, there's a couple things we know. He has sight deterioration. We see this when Itachi is looking at Sasuke and we're given his vision from his perspective. Sasuke's all blurry. It's very similar to, you know, when we see Sasuke's POV against Kakashi. Along with this, there's stamina issues, quote unquote, that everybody brings up. Now, derived off of Itachi having a 2.5 of his stamina in the data books, which does not mean he has low stamina. I think people unbelievably exaggerate Itachi's stamina issues. The reason I say this too, and I'm going to bounce back to this in a second, is that we can actually see off of the 30% clone when Pain activated the Art of Impersonation, allocating 30% of Itachi's chakra into that Sand Shinobi that worked under Sasori. Pretty much when he's fighting Kakashi and Co, he's actually able to, at least in the manga continuity, use 1 clone, 2 genjutsus, and 1 fireball. And when you add in the anime, he actually uses 1 clone, 2 genjutsu, 2 fireballs, and a phoenix flower jutsu. So the anime even paints him as more impressive using all these various techniques with just 30% of his chakra. What nobody brings up though in regards to this 30% clone is that it doesn't get completely destroyed by Naruto's Odama Rasengan, touted to have the equivalent impact strength to a small meteorite. We actually see when he's hit, Itachi smiling while getting pummeled with the technique, which more so displays that the only reason that the Sand Shinobi who was used as a base didn't get completely annihilated was due to Itachi's chakra pumping through his veins. This is also more interesting considering that the clone is only stated to die when the caster runs out of chakra, which only happens when Itachi and Kisame's host bodies are hit with these large-scale techniques. And we do know that chakra is what amps your body and raises its durability. So you can actually throw in the possibility that Itachi and Kisame's doubles were able to not have their bodies completely decimated due to the actual Akatsuki members still controlling them at the point of impact, which more so introduces the idea that Itachi could have potentially used more jutsu with that 30% clone. This might also teeter into Itachi and Kisame possibly having some higher durability than what may have been previously established. I just think it's an interesting little note that nobody brings up. You might ask, why would I even consider bringing that up? Well, the point I want to get across is that Itachi's illness / stamina issues only really matter in these types of conversations when you're discussing him using MS techniques or fighting opponents that require him to spam it, because when he's fighting Sasuke in his fight, he's pretty much getting hit with 2 nerfs at the same time or 2 backlashes. He's getting the general MS drawback from just using the techniques, and then his illness also comes into play. What's interesting too is that, and this isn't like absolute, but when he's like pretty much suffering drawbacks throughout the fight, he makes like a hack noise in the manga, like the sound effect is like a hacking. It's like But the problem is that Sasuke also does make this sound effect when he's fighting the Hokage. Even though he doesn't make it when he's fighting Danzo and Mei, it just pretty much makes it that it's very difficult to judge when he's getting hit by either the illness or the MS drawback, or if he's just getting hit by both continuously. All we know though is that his illness objectively took effect when he's at the later stage of the fight using the Susanoo when he grabs his chest. So whatever, I'm not trying to scale coughs. I don't know if that's how far we've gotten or how bottom of the barrel we're at. But the point of this whole mini discussion is that the illness argument only really matters when Itachi's pushed to his brink or just continuously spamming MS techniques. Same thing with his stamina, as that's what eats up most of his chakra anyway. Same thing in part 1, he needs to rest after using a couple MS techniques. And even in the fight with Sasuke, I believe 6 is the one who introduced this idea, but he actually has a sparring match with Kisame due to the Kanon Generations cutscene. He has a clone that went to go fight Sasuke. He gives Kodo to Naruto, so he actually does do a bit before he fights Sasuke. And then even in that fight, even before he's using his MS techniques, he uses like 1 to 2 Genjutsu. He uses a clone that dissipates into crows. He uses Tsukuyomi to Amaterasu and then initiates the Susanoo twice, along with having a fireball match with Sasuke on top of the Uchiha hideout. So it's very clear that, you know, if you're kind of implying that Itachi's willing to go to the death, which I'm gonna be for this encounter, he, you know, obviously his drawbacks are going to be apparent in these matchups because it's going to provide openings. And another way to look at it is that Itachi quite literally chakra fatigued heavy Sasuke. Sasuke in general is a character known for his endurance in these types of fights and can go the distance, especially with the power of the White Snake. So even considering that, it's just very impressive when you consider it in relativity to other characters. So while I don't think he's like on the level of Pain stamina wise, because Pain's like in a whole nother tier, I do think that people generally overestimate the Itachi stamina thing. That's all. We even see that Itachi may possess some minor sensory capabilities, as even while he's quite literally blind, his eyes are grayed out, he's actually able to feel Orochimaru's chakra and discern exactly what technique he's using, just judging off the feeling alone, which is pretty impressive. There's a lot more to Itachi's character, but I'm gonna save the rest of it for when it becomes more relevant in these discussions and stuff like that, like his Susanoo, how that maybe stacks up, what's all that good stuff. So let's actually get into this discussion. And if you enjoyed what you heard, maybe like some of the stuff, consider subscribing or liking, whatever. Do what you want, man. Starting off with Tsunade. Now, Tsunade is rather interesting because she actually does have some good resistance to Genjutsu via her chakra control. Her and Sakura are very similar in this type, with Sakura being a Genjutsu type. She would obviously notice that her chakra is being influenced or controlled by Itachi and maybe disrupt it. If you want to look at it another way, you could maybe say that once she releases the Byakugo seal, and she's supplied by the seal's internal chakra, that would also interrupt the Genjutsu in a similar capacity to when somebody else would just give you chakra to interrupt the Genjutsu and disrupt it. And we do know this from the Byakugo seal. It actually is an amp on Tsunade as well. It's just stated to power her up even more. So she should be fine when the question of basic Genjutsu comes about, unless you go off the Orochimaru example. But even then, like it's so crazy that Orochimaru really let himself like get, I don't know what he was thinking, or if he just wasn't prepared for Itachi's Genjutsu mastery to be that strong. But it just goes to display that Genjutsu is really potent, and there's just some fighters who can't overcome it. And I will say too, to kind of keep on this discussion, basic Genjutsu shouldn't be enough to put her down. I will say though, you know, Tsunade from a lore perspective shouldn't be on Itachi's level, just with everything in Itachi being above the Sannin, especially him being like above the likes of full power Orochimaru, who quite literally just fought Hiruzen, who also should be above any of the Sannin individually. You can see this in his fight, as the minute he overcomes any reservations about killing Orochimaru, he instantly disarms him, blitzes him, grabs him, and it initiates the Reaper Death Seal. And even though that fight does last an hour, and it's a tug of war where Hiruzen's being impaled and Orochimaru still isn't able to just overpower him, so it should be very clear that on top of the emotional stuff, Hiruzen just is on Orochimaru's level, or implied to be just above it. Tsunade's speed also shouldn't be anything Itachi hasn't dealt with. I couldn't see a situation to where she actually connects a landing blow to him, especially since the way he fights, he uses crow clones, exploding clones as diversionary methods into his killing blow. So there would just never be a situation to where I could see her connecting with the original Itachi, or where he put himself to actually like his real body. If she does, obviously he gets one shot, but it would just never get to that point. She doesn't have this speed edge on him. I will say though, you can make a case he would not be able to put her down permanently or damage her with a lot of a basic kunai or basic fire style, as Tsunade's durability is pretty impressive, eating Madara Zusaku Magatana beads. Or, I mean, even if you want to like take it another way, you can consider the fact that she has to tank the recoil of her own punches, Although this isn't supported by the novels, which does say she breaks her own bones and heals them. So take whichever interpretation you want. The issue with Tsunade though is that she's 100% getting negged by Amaterasu or Tsukuyomi. Both will hit faster than she can evade or deal with. Amaterasu will just tear through her, and even if it doesn't and she actually is able to combat it with her regen, it will consume a ton of chakra. If you want an example, a fatigued Tsunade just slaps away Madara's fire style flame caterwall, and she was affected by it, but she was planning on regenerating it after taking the backlash. She would try to, even if she tried to do the same with the Amaterasu, it might end up just like draining a ton of her chakra, although her supplies are pretty high, so I wouldn't see that. But then it would just fall to Itachi to just use another fresh MS technique, which he'd be able to. So whether that be Susanoo, Totsuka Blade, it doesn't really matter. It's just that for the Amaterasu point, you would just have to argue how fast it would burn versus the speed of her regeneration. Tsukuyomi is also just going to completely rip her apart. She has no way to counter it. It's going to hit instantly. Kakashi figured that the only way he even had a chance is because he actually thought Itachi was going to use a basic Sharingan Genjutsu, and he had a Sharingan to use, like, pretty much fight against it defensively. Same thing with Sasuke. And the problem with these two examples against Tsukuyomi is that in part 1, Itachi just blatantly lets Kakashi live, and Kakashi knows he could have killed him. But the same thing with Sasuke, it's due to the fact that because Itachi is letting him live in that encounter, it begs the question of how valid is Sasuke breaking through Tsukuyomi, because we know Itachi can kind of let off the gas and let people get out of it. Even in the part 1 data book for Tsukuyomi, it's just touted as the most powerful Genjutsu. I know the third data book talks about with his masterful use of the Sharingan, Sasuke defeats the Mangekyo Sharingan. But again, this is almost like a question in the data book. It's like, is it because of his deep hatred towards his brother? Like, the data book almost doesn't know how Sasuke broke out of it. Sasuke is comparatively also only really able to compete with Itachi's Mangekyo when he has his EMS, when they break each other out. His EMS Genjutsu is what's compared to Itachi's Tsukuyomi. So it wouldn't make sense for his basic Sharingan to just be on that level. So any chakra control arguments just don't apply to Tsukuyomi. It just hits way too hard, way too fast. Tsunade doesn't really have any options, but I will say Itachi is kind of forced to use his MS against Tsunade. It's just fortunate that a lot of his early MS abilities just do pretty much take her out. Itachi's Amaterasu, also seen just blatantly blitzing gray-haired Nagato. The same gray-haired Nagato who could react to the likes of version 2B. So it's not like the Amaterasu speed is pretty significant. If you also want another perspective, you could talk about the Obito example, which I'll talk about a little bit more later in the video, since I think Obito used Kamui to escape it. But the fact that Itachi could actually tag him while he's physically focusing on materializing and not passively, you know, using Kamui, and before he could like switch back, I think is pretty crazy of a feat, like prep-wise. So there just shouldn't be any question about Tsunade getting tagged by it. Something interesting for Tsunade, though, is that she would probably just destroy the Uchiha hideout. But again, right, even if she does destroy it, it doesn't really change too much in the grand scheme of it, but she can kind of mitigate that close range advantage that maybe Itachi might have with his Genjutsu. But considering Tsunade is a close range fighter anyway, it's like if she has to move away to do better against Itachi, she's not going to be doing well regardless. Next up, we have Hiruzen. I made that Sani comparison earlier. I will say, though, Hiruzen's kind of similar to Itachi, where he has these conditioning issues. However, he's far worse considering basic ninjutsu and shadow clones are an issue for him. And being above the likes of Orochimaru also isn't as impressive in this case, as Itachi is just more impressive than Orochimaru and has better statements in comparison to him and Hiruzen, specifically off of Orochimaru. And people need to understand that Orochimaru glazing Itachi is just a crazy feat considering who he's willing to fight.
This motherfucker don't miss.
No, he's fucking good.
Like, this dude's a smoke demon. He has no qualms pulling up on Hiruzen. He has no qualms on pulling up on Four Tails Naruto, like, at all. He never has any issues about any of these fighters. But he's like Itachi's #1 glazer. And this is an encounter with base Sharingan Itachi, who you could make a case it isn't as developed with his MS, since that's implied to be when he first joined the Akatsuki. A lot of Hiruzen's arsenal also just isn't as relevant towards, like, Itachi. Like, you can make a good case, yeah, Hiruzen's fire style, which is regarded to be at some of the peak fire style in the series, at least from what we've seen, excluding like Enton, just might be able to beat Itachi's out. But again, like, this is the type of fight where Hiruzen's kind of going to need to get momentum. He's going to need to summon Enma and stuff like that. And considering how close quarters the Uchiha hideout is, he's in prime range for Itachi's harder hitting techniques. Even if you argue that Hiruzen's like combat speed in this situation is above the likes of Orochimaru from their little scuffle, Itachi just would be able to replicate this with the Tsukuyomi and like MS techniques respectively. And you know, this is also consistent if you go off the Shisui novel stuff with him needing to sidestep any gazes in order to, you know, put somebody under the influence of the Mangekyo Sharingan. But in that situation, he was referencing Kodo, so I wouldn't make that leap to just say like he could Tsukuyomi people without them looking in his eyes. So Hiruzen shouldn't possess any speed like too far outside of Itachi, and one of his win cons, like the Reaper Dead Seal, again, Itachi would just never let him get that close and would be able to play around him with clones and whatnot, and really wouldn't, you know, Hiruzen and Tsunade are at that tier where they're not really, if they are going to force Itachi to expend chakra with the MS, but it's not going to be to the point where he gets pushed to like a high diff scenario. Like one technique is all he really needs to finish off either of these fighters. So, you know, Hiruzen and Tsunade, unfortunately, I think just take an L here. Hiruzen definitely does better. And it kind of sucks because, you know, it's hard to say for Hiruzen, but like, he just doesn't have much when he's alive. And I'm not using any Edo characters for this fight because
we don't care. Let me tell you, we don't care. Jerry.
I don't know, it's my video. I will also add too that if you're under the interpretation that Hebi Sasuke surpasses Orochimaru, that also just makes Itachi more impressive because there's a point in the fight where Itachi and Sasuke have a shuriken clash, and Itachi literally out-perception blitzes. He pretty much just shows he's like a blitz tier above Sasuke because he's able to weave hand signs for a clone during the shuriken clash, and Sasuke wasn't able to perceive it with his developed Sharingan. The same thing happens to Kakashi in part 1, so, you know, don't feel too bad, Sasuke fans. But it's just like, he was that much farther above Sasuke in their fight, which, you know, it just goes to show. I will say, though, the Hebi Sasuke Orochimaru stuff, I think really only matters when discussing no arms Orochimaru. I don't think, you know, Hebi Sasuke surpasses full power Orochimaru or anything like that. Next up, we have Danzo, and, you know, Danzo's interesting because he's weird in the sense that you could actually see a situation to where he could maybe outlast Itachi. Now, I will say, again, Itachi should be greater from a stat perspective, and he actually may not even need to spam MS techniques due to the nature of how he fights. Like, he doesn't necessarily need to just use MS techniques to assess. Like, the difference between Sasuke and Itachi is that, A, Sasuke isn't going to have complete intel on Izanagi, which Itachi does. So he isn't going to need to just waste his Mangekyo Sharingan to assess Danzo's ability to regenerate and, like, the duration of his jutsu, which is what Sasuke was doing. Danzo should also be susceptible to a lot of Itachi's basic jutsu. This would be consistent for a couple reasons, starting with Hiruzen being superior to Danzo, which is implied. It's actually stated in one of the novels that Hiruzen just straight up beat Danzo too for the Hokage spot. However, this could be referenced politically as well, or both. We don't know. Now for Danzo, I'm going to start him off with Izanagi in this, you know, for being fair, because otherwise he just gets absolutely raffle stomped. Because Itachi's basic stats would be higher than this Sasuke's, he would just not struggle as much as Danzo because Danzo's more of a rival to this Sasuke outside the Susanoo. Like, they're pretty much on par with one another. There's actually a scene, too, towards the end of the fight where Danzo's pretty much able to evade Sasuke's Chidori just while he has a hole in him. So they're actually very comparable. And I will say, too, Danzo is at a bit of a disadvantage in this encounter because Itachi's fire style is going to be way more useful against his wind style, which Sasuke didn't really capitalize, but that's more so just because he was just beating Danzo down with the Susanoo. Danzo's only real win cons are to, like, Izanagi Itachi straight up, which I don't even see necessarily happening because in character, Itachi fights very similar to Kakashi, where he just leads with a lot of clones and a lot of diversionary maneuvers to open up a potential genjutsu or just like kunai slashing your throat, on top of Itachi having full knowledge of it. So I couldn't necessarily see that being valid. The other big one is Kono Matsukami, and again, this depends if you think like the version that Danzo uses is similar in strength to the one that Itachi would use against EMS Sasuke. You know, Obito doesn't think it would have been much against him, but Obito also had a spare Izanagi, so we don't know what he was going to do in response to that. I will say, too, Itachi is aware of Kodo, so that's also present. Like, Itachi has full knowledge that Danzo did take Shisui's eye, so nothing in Danzo's arsenal would necessarily be surprising to Itachi, but Danzo's best option is just to Kodo off rip and just, like, convince Itachi to, like, stand down as he, like, slits Itachi's throat or something like that, akin to what Shisui does to that Hyuga member in the novel. Other than that, though, Danzo just really doesn't have the capabilities. Like, Itachi, from a stat perspective, is coming in very confident. He'll be able to go the distance. He'll be able to kill Danzo with his basic arsenal. I know people meme about Danzo being the only shinobi who dies to shuriken. And I know people say that that's only in the anime, but it's heavily implied that's what happened in the manga too, since Danzo's eye shuts mid-air, as we see on panel that he's jumping towards Sasuke as well. So it is heavily implied this is kind of how that went down in the manga. What's also interesting about Danzo is that we see in the Sasuke versus Danzo fight that Danzo's extremely susceptible to genjutsu, a far inferior genjutsu in the form of Sasuke's. Now, Sasuke actually does have time manipulation in the like Jin Raiden novel. Why'd I say it like that? But point is, despite the fact that you can say once the Izanagi is activated that Danzo can, he's obviously going to continuously respawn. He'll be able to respawn past the MS techniques. He does show that he is susceptible to these illusionary tactics. So if Itachi actually does have a tighter hold on Danzo, he may actually force him to undo the Izanagi as well, which would also be a GG. So the genjutsu counter aspect, even though Danzo does have a good defense for it, since he does have at least in this situation, a Sharingan would be active, it still wouldn't be enough, generally speaking, for Itachi. The Baku isn't as relevant since this is such a closed space. I can't really see Danzo really forcing Itachi outside of the Uchiha hideout, unlike somebody like Tsunade. His wind style kind of gets countered in this situation. It would just really amp Itachi's own fire style, or just combust and backfire on Danzo. It would just be a lot of what Itachi did to Sasuke, with using a lot of diversionary crows into slamming attacks. And considering he has full intel on everything Danzo has, it's just there's nothing really Danzo should have that would surprise him. And I could see an argument to say that Danzo might also have the a lot of intel on Itachi as well, due to him having knowledge on the Amaterasu and Tsukuyomi. But even then, right, if both people have intel and Itachi's still greater, that just means Itachi's going to perform better. Itachi being more comparable to Sasuke in like a combat setting. So aside from maybe the Kodo stuff, I just can't see a situation to where Danzo would really just be able to out fatigue Itachi or force him to use MS techniques. As again, he's not in the same position as Sasuke. He doesn't really need to fish for intel. I will say though, if he does initiate the Susanoo, that will definitely grant him a lot of Danzo's eyes. It's just kind of a matter of like how the fight is structured. And what people don't bring up is that Sasuke does get stronger after this fight. His hatred actually peaks out and his Susanoo evolves again. And it's actually the same Susanoo that he uses when he unveils his internal Mangekyo Sharingan. And after, it peaks out and his eyes burn out, he gets Itachi's eyes and immediately starts growing in strength, despite not actually being able to use them. So the difference between like Itachi, who should be more comparable to EMS Sasuke, and this Sasuke cannot be overstated. It is a pretty big difference. So I definitely think Itachi should also get the pass in this scenario. Next up, we got Minato. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this section's a lot. If you're looking at the video, this section's probably one of the longer ones, because this could be its own video. So I'm gonna try my best to kind of like condense it down. But this topic can be its own video. Keep that in mind. Now, starting off, I do want to establish a couple things that will make it easier to discuss this fight. Starting off, I think there is a fundamental difference between Hokage Minato and Jonin Minato, making it so that any feats displayed by Jonin Minato are just not his peak. There are a couple ways we can confirm this, and this is relevant to the discussion, so just bear with me, guys. We know that from his data book entry that he did continue to engage in battle after becoming Hokage, with the entry reading as followed. His command ability fostered in real battle must have been put into practical use even after he took the position as Hokage. This is very interesting, especially when you pair it up with some supplementary statements, such as this statement made on chapter 298, right around the time part 1 of Naruto was wrapping up, specifically after his battle with Sasuke, which regards Minato as having unrivaled strength. Even taking this as only in reference to shinobi who are alive, it still is a pretty good statement when considering a more prime Itachi, Raikage, old Hiruzen, and full power Orochimaru were all introduced at this point in the story. One could chalk this up to Kishimoto switching the narrative on the Hokage hierarchy, but I still do think this is consistent with some interpretations of Minato's strength, even the higher ones placing him more so on KCM2 Naruto's level. There's also the Raikage stuff with him saying he's the fastest since Minato died. This is somewhat debatable, as some people believe that the whole Minato, the Raikage not boasting speed inferior to the Yellow Flash is either in reference to Hokage Minato or Jonin Minato. The reason this is a debatable topic is because Jonin Minato is more so known as the Yellow Flash. However, like the whole counter argument to this is that, would you really lose your nickname after becoming Hokage? Or would you like there be just kind of like a title change from like the Yellow Flash to the 4th Hokage? I will say it makes more sense that people would not refer to Minato as the Yellow Flash as Hokage, since in a similar capacity, you don't really see people refer to Kakashi as the copy ninja after he becomes Hokage. There's actually a bit of consistency for this in the series, that characters kind of do change their titles when like changing forms or like moving into a new position. An example of this is kind of Jiraiya against Pain, where he says he's gonna like shed his like. He's pretty much saying, like, I'm evolving past the Sannin as he's about to enter Sage mode, and that he's now going to be, like, referred to as a Sage. If you're asking my personal opinion, I've always gone on the interpretation that this is more so in reference to Jonin Minato. The scene just implies it, like, that's the Minato being used as reference. That's the Minato that A has been known for fighting, the Minato that A has had a couple confrontations with. The Minato is also suppressed versus A and B and does say that he likes A and B, which does matter because Minato's a pretty forward-thinking person, so him, like, kind of wanting to resonate with a person who would be a Kage and have influence over the world is pretty... It is a pretty big deal. The fact that Minato during the time of the 3rd grade ninja war was also praised as the fastest paints a pretty compelling narrative that he would just be above 4th Raikage A. And even if you did take this statement for the 4th Raikage being as fast as Hokage Minato, which, I mean, if you do, you know, I won't fault you. Like, I think it is a fair enough interpretation, even though I don't think it's as implied. You would never be able to differentiate, like, what that exactly means. Like, that's not obviously referencing reaction speed. At most, you could say combat speed, but we know the 4th Raikage does not have instantaneous movement. The Flying Thunder God being what actually made Minato the fastest. So, it just couldn't be in reference to that. This also being supplemented with the fact that Minato can keep pace with Warrior Kakashi while fighting against Black Zetsu. Like, it's an off-screen fight, but Zetsu notes, like, they're persistent with, like, smoke everywhere. So, Minato would have to be relative on some spectrum. Otherwise, Kakashi would just be outdoing them, and Black Zetsu would say, Kakashi, you're the problem. But he's like, nah, you guys are persistent. Okay, that was a lot. I'm sorry. It's not a Minato solo video. I just had to, like, this is a big... Listen, look at what this matchup's got smoke to it, man. Like, you ain't gonna tell me you don't hear about Minato versus Itachi and start sweating because of how hot this matchup is. Now, with that being said, Itachi from, like, a taijutsu perspective, like combat speed, is just not on, you know... It's more consistent that he wouldn't be on this Minato's level, at least with his, like, base Tomoe Sharingan and taijutsu. I know everybody brings up the KCM1 Naruto encounter. I think that encounter can be debated to be either way, like a good feat for Itachi or it just not being indicative, since, you know, people give it like, okay, that's obviously Itachi when he's suppressed on the autopilot, but also it could be argued, okay, that Naruto's kind of just more so fishing for information against Itachi and not going all out. So it would be more consistent to say like Minato would be, for all intents and purposes, faster. For Itachi to more so compete with Minato's speed, it would definitely have to be diversionary tactics into his Mangekyo techniques. Now, I'll start off by saying this. Now, there's a lot to this fight. Like, off-rip, Minato's going to do what he does in character and throw kunai all over the battlefield. And for Itachi, right? Because Itachi actually does have a bit of knowledge on Minato. He knows about Minato. He knows about Kushina. Because he has heard of stories about the 3rd Great Ninja War and seen portions of it, he also should have an idea of Flying Raijin or heard about Minato's like instant teleportation. So he would have a decent idea of what Minato's capable. Now, I will say, this kind of goes in line with one of Itachi's win conditions in this fight, right? Because I will say this, starting off, Minato benefits the longer this fight goes on because Itachi's best win condition, in my opinion, is to just Tsukuyomi Minato. Which obviously Minato has to look at his eyes. So if he's obviously throws his kunai and starts teleporting around without looking at Itachi's eyes, it's definitely a lot harder for Itachi to get that instant genjutsu. Now, it could be a bit more questionable for basic genjutsu, I won't lie. There's also that other statement made in Data Book 3 that talks about Naruto being the only one who can surpass the 4th Hokage. While alive, Raikage and Itachi are around at the time. Now, I don't want to get carried away with the statements because you do kind of sometimes have to take the Data Book statements with a grain of salt because certain statements are made without certain feats or certain parts of the story being introduced with certain characters. So I won't die on this hill. I'm just more so introducing a narrative that is being perpetuated since we don't know how deep Minato's genjutsu resistance is. But honestly, this is kind of a situation to where the location really matters because you're kind of in a similar situation where Minato fights Obito for the first time and he's like holding Naruto as a baby. And Minato just like body flickers, pops through Obito and grabs Naruto. It's like, dude, instead of Itachi being the one to move towards Sasuke, Minato's just gonna dart over to that chair. So it paints the idea that Itachi's better win condition for genjutsu really is only applicable at the beginning of this fight, which I know you probably inferred just from like listening to this video and like the other matchups, because after that Minato's just going to be darting around way too much to be making direct eye contact with Itachi. With that being said though, Tsukuyomi, and this is the reason it's like one of the strongest abilities in the series, it still is a game changer. It still does win him this encounter. It's just a matter of getting it off. Minato throwing all his kunai in the room, though, could actually be a hindrance to him. And I do think it is to a pretty big degree because he's obviously not going to have as much of an area to like teleport around to, unless he like breaks through the like ceiling of the Uchiha hideout and throws a kunai out there, which he could do. But more so immediately, for example, if Itachi recognizes the threat with Minato and attempts to Amaterasu him off rip, Minato, first and foremost, is avoiding it. You know, if the 4th Raikage is, I kind of covered the Minato stuff with him. Minato arguably having pretty better reaction feats. I would even say like Madara's truth-seeking orbs, which although I don't think is the best feats, could still indicate he has a better reaction feat than anything the Raikage has done. Even like 6th Gate Lee, right, who reacts to it. Granted, we don't see where Lee comes from off panel, but even that Lee isn't like, he's kind of crazy. Like, this is the same Lee that cut Madara in half before Madara threw up a Susanoo ribcage. Like, maybe you could argue he didn't want to sever the connection to the Ten Tails, but at that point, you would think you would prefer to stay on the Ten Tails than let someone cut through you. So I'm just saying. But again, I don't think the truth-seeking orbs are like the best feat. Like, a lot of people do react to them. But again, the people who do are generally like higher tier characters. So Itachi could actually drag the Amaterasu around the room and take out all the kunai that Minato may have placed as like Minato's trying to teleport around, which would obviously present a big issue and like force the fight outside. And I will say too, the minute this fight does get outside, it drastically favors Minato, and I'm going to talk about that more in a bit because he's just going to chuck more kunai. I don't want to say he has like infinite kunai, but I want to ask you this. When has Minato ever run out of kunai in any of his fights? Never once. Even in the war, this dude he's got all of them. Like, I don't know, people talk about like tandem paper bombs Tobirama, but like, can we talk about tandem kunai Minato? Like, I'm just saying. So in any aspect where this fight does begin indoors, I do think Itachi does have a pretty distinct advantage due to the nature of his arsenal. Even with the Amaterasu, the whole Genjutsu point, because Minato's in prime Genjutsu range, it's going to be a lot easier for Itachi. And the thing about Itachi, too, is that if he does make clones in this scenario, he could actually bait Minato into FTGing into an exploding clone, which would be pretty disastrous. Or any clones that Minato would, like, take down would just, like, dissolve into crows. Same thing with Itachi. Like, you know, when you see him get struck in the chest by Kabuto in the fight and then he dissolves into crows, there could be something similar here. Because Minato's combat speed should not be a blitz tier above what Itachi with his Mangekyo can perceive. Even ignoring the KCM1 stuff, if you follow that line of, like, you know, the train of thought that Itachi's more comparable to like the EMS Sasuke and he's on that level, that Sasuke is also more comparable to a more developed Naruto. Now, that's kind of like a trash statement, I will admit, because there are ways to say like that Sasuke gets stronger. But even then, like, his development shouldn't put him a whole tier above the previous version that was fighting against Itachi, if you get what I'm saying. It would be more of a passive buff via hatred and him just using his eyes. Not really this whole giant tier increase from Naruto, like, unlocking Kurama. But this kind of goes back to the whole stamina point, right? Because Minato's definitely one of those fighters that Itachi is going to be forced to use those large portions of chakra into his MS techniques, because basic fire style and clones just aren't going to cut it. They're really going to be diversionary tactics. He's really going to have to couple them with his MS techniques and really kind of outplay Minato. And I will say, once this fight does go outside, the likelihood of Itachi winning just plummets, because he's going to have been using up a bit of chakra at that point. Minato's going to be able to spread more markings outside. He'll probably still have some markings inside the building, in which case, if Itachi doesn't get that instant takedown, he's not going to be really able to tag Minato from that point forward, and his margin for error is just going to be non-existent. Like, he cannot make mistakes at that point, and using up any MS technique pretty much makes it that he's going to be that much closer to defeat. There's this Susanoo itself, which also could be put into question. Now, I will say, right, a lot of people are going to point to the statement of Minato having, like, strength on the rival of the Rasen Shuriken, like, rivaling the Rasen Shuriken. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this statement isn't usable. It's a mistranslation.
It's totally made up. Pure fiction. It's fiction. It's fiction. We made it up.
And it's weird to say because a lot of people have used this statement in the community for a while, but when we actually got it translated, Minato or like the 4th Hokage are never mentioned in the statement. They're never brought up. It's pretty horrendous actually how much localization Viz threw in with this specific scan, which now granted I do think Minato's Rasengan is impressive. I just don't think it's one-shotting a Susanoo. I hate to be that guy, but I just don't think it is. Even the one-shot really wouldn't support that. I don't really have to go into that because I made a video on it, so go check that out. I'm not going to get into that here. But yeah, there's no real way to argue that this Rasengan is just going to be blowing up the Susanoo. It's just not possible. I'd take more time to talk about the Yata mirror and exactly how strong Itachi Susanoo is in durability, but I do talk about that in a future segment of this video, so bear with me, but just know basic kunai Rasengans really aren't going to be cutting it at this point. But I will say, right, at this stage of the fight, it's not as if Minato really needs to be using that much like of an offensive approach here. Like, he really could just time Itachi out at that point. And there's a lot of interesting stuff Minato can do, especially when discussing the Susanoo. You can make the argument that he could actually teleport the Susanoo itself away from Itachi. If he has a mark set somewhere else, just like grab it and teleport it out. The Susanoo does move with the user, but it is possible to separate it. So using space-time ninjutsu as opposed to just like consciously holding the defense with you, it's a little debatable, I will grant you, but there is that interpretation. Not to mention that Minato also does have Gamma Bunta, so if he ever does want to gain distance, he can throughout this fight and just wait out Itachi. The biggest thing to argue for Itachi in this specific situation is just his Totsuka blade speed, which at its peak could be argued to be potentially superior to full power Nagato. And that's, you know, that's kind of a debatable topic. I know that kind of gets into Itachi versus Nagato, and I have a video on that. But to kind of like spark notes it here, basically Itachi plunges the Totsuka blade like throughout, like pretty much there's like a smoke cloud in front of Nagato which inhibits his movement. Itachi plunges the Totsuka blade through it. Now, the whole thing where people get iffy is that the Totsuka blade would have had to exit the smoke cloud, which would have given Nagato's time to perceive it, and Nagato still didn't dodge. And when I say Nagato, I really mean Kabuto, because he's the one who's controlling that Nagato. And I will say, too, this is kind of goes back to, like, where you interpret Minato's lore, because if you go, like, super more conservative and say, like, oh, he's super lame, KCM1 level, then you could actually see a case for the Totsuka blade and like the Susanoo itself maybe actually being somewhat comparable in speed, since the Susanoo is like far faster than the user. So there's a layer to this discussion, which I can't get into every single crevice where there is some like minor interpretations and like minor concessions that do have to be had. I just do want to acknowledge that. Reaper Dead Seal also doesn't matter too much, since that only really results in a draw for Minato. Itachi in this case really just has the best advantage with like early Genjutsu to Tsukuyomi or just diversionary into Genjutsu, because he's not going to allow for Minato to get any momentum, get any marks everywhere, and wear his stamina down and like push him to a point where his illness can really like come to the surface. One of the other ways I could potentially see maybe looking at Itachi versus Minato is maybe comparing them off Obito. Obito, who's more of like a pseudo rival to Minato at a younger age. Granted, Minato does just beat him, but obviously Obito would go on to get stronger. I know some people argue like Yellow Mask versus Orange Mask Obito. However, it would make more sense for Orange Mask to be stronger. One way to argue this is the whole like arm situation. For those who don't know, Obito has like the wrong arm blown off from Minato. Basically, Kishimoto fucked up and just created a plot hole because he probably forgot which arm got blown off. However, though, you know, it's kind of in the series. The end canon, like what people say would be a reason for Obito getting stronger, is him actually having more Senju cells as a response to compensate for that broken arm, which would lead Orange Mask Obito to be stronger, along with him having Izanagi. So that's just one minor way, but yeah, Orange Mask should be stronger. You gotta look at how Obito treats Itachi as like a sort of threat and also a pseudo rival, literally referring to him as an eyesore and like kind of like in a chess opponent of sorts. On this note too, people have the idea that Itachi perception blitzed Obito with the Amaterasu. I will say, so this feat's weird, right? I will say this first and foremost. It's pretty heavily implied that Obito did use Kamui to break through the Amaterasu. Now, the reason I say this is because the diction in the data book heavily implies it's Kamui, because the way it describes it, like the whole using space-time ninjutsu, and the language used is only used in reference to Kamui. It's not used during Izanagi. And we've seen Obito actually Kamui when he has things stuck on him, like Konan's paper bombs. The main thing I see people say with this is that, okay, why would Obito go and fake getting hit by a Amaterasu? Like, Obito also didn't fake being a jackass for like 100 chapters for the sake of maintaining his cover under the Akad. Obito's just a capper. He's certified. He has his stamp. And it would make sense in the grand scheme of the series, because it would lure Sasuke into a false sense of security, and him thinking that he could use Amaterasu against Obito, which Sasuke does do. And even Obito says, like, it's useless to get Sasuke stronger and have him sync with the Geto statue if I can't control him. So this would work in just giving Sasuke that false sense of security and using him to control him. But the reason I bring this up is because Obito actually did have to make a point to materialize at that second and was caught off guard. So it makes more sense that he got tagged by it while he was consciously materialized, and then just Kamui'd it after. I have to bring that up because I've heard it said that Itachi's Amaterasu is going to just go ahead and just, you know, blitz past Obito's passive Kamui, which I just don't agree with. So just a quick note, because I also wouldn't believe that would put him inherently above Minato. So if I had to kind of like rate this battle, I would say like in the early fight, Itachi definitely has a distinct advantage, unless you argue like Minato's that much faster. And then as the fight progresses, Minato just gains more and more momentum to the point where he just outlasts Itachi by just keeping his distance, teleporting around, and forcing him to expend loads of chakra with his MS techniques. And with Itachi, that can come a couple different ways. Maybe baiting Minato to FTG into an exploding clone, and then again, Minato can just teleport back if he's able to react fast enough. Or just a Amaterasu Minato as he teleports to a kunai or catch him under a genjutsu. And then for Minato, it's a little simpler. Just pretty much can catch Itachi when he's backlashing from any of his like MS uses, or just outlast him throughout this fight. Again, I could maybe see Itachi potentially working something out with the Susanoo, but it's just a little tougher. It's a little tougher in that situation because it gives Minato a lot more room to breathe. If this were Edo Tensei Itachi, though, I will say this would be a completely different discussion. Completely different discussion. But this is more so a sickened and weakened version of the character, which obviously makes it a lot harder for him to perform at his absolute peak consistently, because from the moment the fight starts, he's going to be at a consistent decline. I don't want to gloss over this matchup because there is a lot to it, but to kind of like encapsulate it and generalize it. But again, like when you have these two characters with such high intellect, so this one's definitely very debatable. I would just say like early fight, Itachi has a distinct advantage. Late fight, Minato has a pretty distinct advantage. Next up, we have Tobirama. Man. Let me tell you something about Tobirama, man. With this character, I just never feel like I can win. You know what I'm saying? Now, I'm gonna put it like this, because I like Tobirama. I'm gonna be honest with you guys. Like, you know, we're sitting at the bar. We're gonna conversate for a sec. I like Tobirama a lot, right? What I don't like is Tobirama fans. That's who I despise. These dudes are unhappy. I don't know why they're unhappy, but they're forcing me to be unhappy, and that's what makes me unhappy. Now, jokes aside, Tobirama's pretty impressive. Now, I'll start off by saying this. Itachi's not really gonna, like, it's kind of similar to Minato, where Itachi's not really gonna be running through Tobirama in terms of pure speed. I think the Jubito running through Tobirama and Tobirama being relative enough to mark Obito is pretty much all you would really need to say. Now, some people are under the opinion that Tobirama blitzed Obito 5 times. That's asinine. I'm not gonna lie, I disagree with that wholeheartedly. It is what it is. I don't know what to tell you. But I will say, being relative enough to actually mark Obito, even if he is like running through you, bad wording, but you get what I'm saying, is very impressive. Especially since like Naruto at that point wasn't really able to discern what was going on in the battle because everything was happening too fast. So for Tobirama to be kind of acting like this with such quick thinking and reaction times is very impressive. Now, I don't want to repeat a lot of what I said with the Minato stuff. I think Tobirama and Minato actually are very similar in this type of situation. Where they like Tobirama struggles a lot more in the early fight. I think you could argue with Minato, he comes in a bit stronger with the stat perspective off the Obito stuff. Obviously, the Genjutsu point is present. Now, I will say Tobirama does get a pretty substantial amp when fighting against Uchiha. This is stated in the 14th anniversary guide of Naruto. Don't go looking for it. The statement, I had to get it translated. The book was in Portuguese. You don't go looking for it. You won't find the statement. But point is, Tobirama knows what he's doing against the Uchiha. He has a lot of nuanced jutsu that he can use. I mean, I don't want to repeat points. Bringer of Darkness is obviously one. Anime, of course, because manga, he doesn't use this. But obviously, he has Yin release, so you could infer he should be able to use it. The biggest thing that holds Tobirama back, in my opinion, is how readily he's going to have his Flying Raijin Kunai present. Because he is going to need to mark it, and he is going to need to throw the Kunai or have it ready while Itachi is kind of like shooting off these large-scale attacks, which is going to be tough. I'll also say that, you know, Itachi's taijutsu, I don't think is going to be like out perception blitzing Tobirama or anything like that. I mean, it's the same guy who close quarters could manage a teleport away from Madara, at least with his like basic taijutsu. So I'm not going to sit here and say Itachi like slashing a kunai is going to be too much. I think it's a lot of the same, honestly, like just possible Tsukuyomi Genjutsu. Basic Genjutsu, again, Tobirama probably has an adept mind for. It's just really like how long is it going to take for Tobirama to like whip out that kunai and mark it before Itachi shoots something off? Because that does determine a lot of this. I think Tobirama also suffers in the close quarters range. I think you could definitely say like he might be too fast for Itachi to quite catch with this like a Amaterasu or anything like that. Funny enough, Storm 4 actually just shows Tobirama teleporting away from an Amaterasu attempt. I know that's not canon, but I do think it's kind of funny that he does that in some sort of Naruto media. I know that's not fair. Like, I'm not bringing that up as a source. I just think it's interesting. I will also add, you know, he has the obvious water style advantage, which is pretty much going to neg all of Itachi's fire style. The biggest issue for Tobirama, too, is that in this situation, he's just not going to be able to get tandem paper bombs off. I mean, look, there's no Edo Tensei. That's what he uses for tandem paper bombs. I know some people say otherwise. I don't really go off that interpretation. That book and series don't really support it. And again, by the time he's going to summon these Edo Tensei, Itachi can do a lot. He could seal them if he really wants to with the Totsuka Blade. I also think that if he does summon any Edo Tensei, A, you kind of have to argue they're on par with Itachi in their stats. And B, you also argue that tandem paper bombs just blow through the Susanoo, which I will say, Yadamir is blocking that. Yadamir was blocking some paper bombs. It was taking the form of the paper bombs. I don't know how people really feel about omnidirectional, like, Yadamir. I think it's a fair enough stance since the mirror does take shape when the paper bombs are thrown at it. And Zetsu, the literal will of Kaguya, does kind of call Itachi invincible, which I think is pretty high praise. Now, I will add, too, that Itachi did not use the Yadamir to block Kirin. I've heard this argument a couple of times, but it just would make no sense that he would whip out the Yadamir right after. Like, there would be no reason for Kishimoto to write the Yadamir getting destroyed and then have Black Zetsu say, oh, it's impervious to all attacks. Like, it wouldn't work. And when Itachi says, without this, I would have been dead, he's referring to the Susanoo itself. The Yadamir also forms with the fully developed Susanoo, or like beyond the base ribcage, so it would take more time for that as well. So I will say, like, he does have options for that type of attack. Aside from that too, Tobirama has no way to breach the Susanoo with any of his water style. Like, I know listen. He cuts the God tree. Like, 4 different people cut the God tree. I'm not hearing that. No water style technique from Tobirama has any AP showings to suggest it would break through the Itachi Susanoo at that point. Which, again, if Tobirama doesn't really have a mark about, there could be some potential there since he wouldn't have knowledge of the spirit weapons if he does, despite him knowing about the Susanoo. So, but again, like, right, even though I say this, Tobirama could just do a lot of what Minato does. Like, that, a lot of arguments for Minato kind of do apply to Tobirama, where he just, like, teleports the Susanoo itself out or just teleports away. He's just not going to be teleporting as much because he's not going to have as many markings about, which is going to make it harder for him to kind of evade a lot of these attacks. Granted, though, this is a later War Arc character who is compared to EMS Sasuke and is implied to be a threat to him, so I think he would be very threatening to Itachi. Like, to say otherwise would just be extremely disingenuous, in my opinion. Honestly, I don't want to skim past Tobirama, but it's a lot of the same with Minato. Like, I just don't. Tobirama has a better matchup in some ways due to the whole water style and, like, maybe some Bringer of Darkness. He has some Shadow clones, some potential Edo Tensei, so he does have options, but in some other ways, he is a weaker fighter than Minato. Like, he doesn't have Sealing Ninjutsu. Like, this is something my buddy Sage's Thick Calves brought up to me, but we were musing around with the idea that, like, for example, Minato could seal Itachi's vision, kind of similar to since when Sasuke got captured, he had like a seal placed over his eyes. I don't know, I gotta give him credit, but we thought that was kind of like a cool interpretation. But yeah, it's kind of similar. Like, if you think Minato is like that much faster, like, oh, his body flicker that he used to get to the battlefield first, that translates to, you know, I know people say like the travel versus combat speed, but if you imply he does that in combat sitting consistently, paints him as faster than everybody else, he does that and just decapitates Itachi. Maybe a similar thing with Tobirama, you just have his stats via teleportation that much more above. I think a lot of the same for Minato and Tobirama just apply. With Itachi having that distinct advantage in the early, maybe Tobirama would I think Tobirama would struggle a bit more in the later phase with Itachi too, so maybe he has less of a margin for error than Minato. But I don't want to be a dead horse. This also does depend on Tobirama versus Minato. Like, if you think Minato is faster, then there you go. Like, take what I said during the Minato section. If you think Tobirama is faster, then there you go. Just take whatever I said during the Minato section and apply it a certain another way. So yeah, that's Tobirama. I will say though, there is a chance for Itachi in the Minato and Tobirama section of the video. This is actually probably the closest section he has with characters, because after this, there's a pretty vicious power creep. Next up, we have Hokage Kakashi, who is just way stronger than War Arc Kakashi. Via the novel statement, everyone is aware of this. Chakra quantities are stated to be magnitudes higher. The reason this is pretty important is because when looking at the order of magnitude, it goes up by the powers of 10. So this statement just pretty much talks about Kakashi being like tens, having a chakra quantity tens of times greater than what he was in the War Arc, which is more so a result of the Sharingan just not constantly draining his chakra supply, him training. So there is a pretty bad clipping with Hokage Kakashi. Like, the reason this is such a clipping is, like, for example, Tobirama versus EMS Sasuke, right? That's a debatable topic in my opinion. War Kakashi just clips both those fighters. So there really isn't room for anything. Like, even the saying Itachi might be comparable to like EMS Sasuke. There isn't room for any of that because Kakashi would just clip all of that again. So this is a situation where a fighter would just be too fast for Itachi to really deal with. This also being consistent, if you think Kakashi is somewhat comparable to QB Minato in combat speed. Now, I will say, I don't like using this line of scaling. I do think QB Minato would beat that Kakashi. But if you did want to say they are somewhat in a similar range in terms of strictly combat speed and not like teleportation or anything like that, that would just go on to extrapolate this point. That Kakashi would just be too fast for Itachi and rush him down with Purple Lightning. The only argument for Itachi would just be Genjutsu Tsukuyomi at that point. Everything else would just not be effective. Nor would he get the opportunity to really use any of that other stuff from his arsenal. Next up, we have Hokage Hashirama. And I mean, this is kind of a wash, as we expected. You know, Hashirama just fights EMS Madara, who's stronger than Itachi. It's not really rocket science. He's just like long range, you know, long range wood style just wipes. I will say too, Hashirama may actually just be too strong for Itachi's level of Genjutsu to be effective. The reason I say this is because Sasuke's basic EMS Genjutsu is shown to be on a similar like level to Itachi's Tsukuyomi. It even moves at a similar speed. But even if you argue that Itachi was slowing down Tsukuyomi for Sasuke to use his basic EMS Genjutsu, the fact that that was what he used while Itachi used Tsukuyomi, I think is very telling, when Itachi could have just used regular Genjutsu as well. And Hashirama would more than likely just be above that, since Madara would have more than likely tried to Genjutsu him many times throughout their bouts, and it probably just didn't work, or Hashirama just built up countermeasures to it, which just makes it that he really wouldn't be able to control it. I mean, this is the same guy who's like throwing down with the perfect Susanoo. Like, Itachi Susanoo's not doing anything. Hashirama's gonna grab it like a football and kick it with the wooden golem. There's nothing really too much there. Hashirama's literally the Sharingan killer. Like, people talk about Tobirama, but Hashirama literally was making these dudes defect. You know what I'm saying? He brought them over to his side. That's a different level of strong. Hashirama can make wood clones. It's just, there's all this crazy stuff. Like, I feel like Hashirama versus Itachi really doesn't really need to be discussed that in depth. You know what I'm saying? If it does, I don't know what to really tell you. Like, there's just not too much here. And then it's like a similar thing with adult Naruto, which is just like this on steroids. Like, he's a rival to adult Sasuke, who has like an EMS, grows with his EMS, gets a Rinnegan, gets 10 years of training. Not too questionable in this aspect either. So that's the video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. I think the real meat of the discussion is just Minato and Tobirama. I think those are the most interesting ones. Some of the minor other Kage also do pretty well, but it's a little tougher since Itachi just wins. And then with all these other Kage, Itachi just kind of loses. There's not really too much of a discussion to really be had. So let me know what you guys think. Agree, disagree, why. And if it seemed like I was skimming over some sections in the video, that was more so because like I have solo videos on all these characters and I just really don't want to. I'm trying to make an effort not to repeat stuff I'm saying in like other videos, just for my own sake and for the content to not become repetitive. So if it seemed like that, it's not because I'm forgetting. It's just more so like I'm skimming over that. If you want like more Danzo stuff, for example, Danzo has a solo video. There's plenty of videos on Tobirama and stuff like that, so you could check that out.